The new president cut my commission in half and gave the other half to the founder's son. He said it was right sizing. 6 weeks later, my two biggest accounts called my new employer to ask when I'd be in to see them. It was Tuesday, February 27th, 2024, 2 in the afternoon, Lakeshore Hydraulic and Pneumatic, second floor conference room, Cleveland, gray light, salt residue on the parking lot asphalt outside. Marcus Holstrom sat at the head of the table in silver-rimmed glasses and a Brunello Cucinelli cuff. Theo Lakeshore Sr. sat to his left, looking at the table. Teddy Lakeshore Jr. sat to his right with AirPods Max around his neck, the way another man might wear a tie. A stack of memos was already printed. Lakeshore letterhead, Salesforce Re-Architecture, 2024. Marcus slid one across without looking up. He used the words right sizing for the senior team. My commission rate, 1.8% on the Cleveland Cliffs and Sherwin-Williams books, was being moved to 0.4. The 1.4% spread was being reassigned to Teddy as a development override. My total compensation, $165,000 at year-end, would land at 95. Marcus said the structure was the structure. He said Teddy needed the platform. I waited. At 2:14 I asked Theo. I did not look at Marcus. I asked Theo because 30 years and 3 months ago he had shaken my hand on a handshake hire on a Tuesday in November 1993. And I wanted that handshake to be in the room with us before he answered. He did not look up from the table. Marcus has my backing on the structure, Walt. Teddy is growing into the role. He needs the platform. That was the answer. The handshake was not in the room. Understood, I said. I closed the manila folder I had not opened. I took the stairs. At 2:38, I was in the Subaru with the heater warming and the engine ticking as it cooled. Let me back up. Let me tell you who that man at the table was. I am Walter Chmielewski. People call me Walt, 62 years old, born 1962 on the west side of Cleveland, to a Polish-American family, married to Teresa Chmielewski since 1986, 38 years, 2 grown children, James, 35, software engineer at PNC Bank in Pittsburgh, Caroline, 33, attorney at the Ohio Attorney General's office in Columbus. We live in Lakewood in a brick colonial that has been paid off since 2017. The car in the driveway is a 2014 Subaru Outback, dark blue, paid off too. I never served. I worked the parts counter at a Bosch Rexroth distributor on Brook Park Road from age 18 and paid my own way through a bachelor's in mechanical engineering at Cleveland State at night, 1989. The diploma is in a closet upstairs. 30 years and 3 months at Lakeshore. Senior account director by title. Customer book by reality. 2 of the customers on that book were Cleveland Cliffs, East Chicago, and Sherwin-Williams Resin Manufacturing in Bedford Heights. Maria Bennett, procurement director at the Cliffs Mill, has known my voice on her phone since April 1999. Kenneth Howard, procurement chief at the Sherwin-Williams resin plant since September 2005. Between them, they bought about $28 million a year of pneumatic and hydraulic hardware from Lakeshore. Lakeshore's whole annual revenue was about $71 million. The top 10 accounts together were about $54 million. Those two were a little over a third of the company on their own, and a man who had carried them for 25 and 19 years had a pretty good sense of how the freight got moved. That was what the Salesforce Re-Architecture 2024 memo did not mention. My grandmother raised me, Sophia. We called her Babsia. My mother died of leukemia in 1969. I was 7. Babsia had come over from Krakow in 1948 at 45 with her sister and a single suitcase, and she moved into our duplex on West 65th and Madison the week of the funeral, and stayed until she died in 1984 at 81. She walked me to St. Adalbert's every Sunday. She taught me Kapuśniak and Golabki. She kept a Polish proverb for every situation a boy could find himself in, and most of them she said in Polish first, and then translated for me on the second pass, slower, like she wanted to be sure I had heard it twice. She had a saying about a man's worth I am going to come back to later. I went to the Bosch Rexroth parts counter at 18 because that was what was hiring on Brook Park Road in 1980. I went to night school at Cleveland State because Babsia had told me a man without a craft is a man without a roof. I finished the Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering in 1989. James was on the way. I had been writing quotes off the parts counter for the Lakeshore guys for 2 years before Theo Lakeshore Sr. walked in one Tuesday in November 1993 and offered me a job on the road. There was no contract. There was a handshake. I drove the road 14 years before we landed Cliffs, 19 years before Sherwin. I was on Interstate 90 more weeks than I was at home, and Teresa raised the kids the way her mother had raised her. I missed Caroline's senior recital at St. Edward in 2009 because of a quote review at the Cliffs Mill. She still has the program. It is in a drawer. I know which drawer. In June 2016, Theo Sr. semi-retired and did not announce it. On Tuesday, June 14th, he sent me an email. The Cleveland Cliffs 5-year master had just landed, and he wanted me to know he was attaching a 0.5% override on it. Life of the deal, in writing from him. I forwarded the email home that night. Teresa, on her laptop at the kitchen table, looked at me over her glasses and said, "Send it to my Yahoo, Walt. Put it where the company's network can't lose it." I did. It has lived in her Yahoo archive for almost 8 years. If you've ever been told you're not ready by someone who couldn't do your job for 5 minutes, you know exactly where this is going. Like and subscribe. In March 2017, Theo brought in Marcus from a private equity-backed roll-up out of Chicago, Northwestern Kellogg MBA, 2000, to professionalize the company. In January 2018, after Marcus's commission restructure rollout, the override line on my pay statement quietly stopped appearing. I raised it once with Theo in March 2018, in his office, after hours. He said, "I'll talk to Marcus." Nothing was paid. The principal was $11,000 at that point, and I let it go because I was not in the business of being a man who beat down a founder's door over $11,000. I made a quiet note. I kept the email. I kept driving the road. In May 2018, Teddy graduated Stanford GSB. In April 2019, Marcus tried to slip a non-compete clause into a handbook update. I declined to sign. He did not push. He did not, I think, want a paper trail on a refusal. In July 2020, Bart Sawicki asked me out for a Pilsner Urquell at Sokolowski's University Inn. Bart owns Penn Ohio Industrial Power down in Akron with his sister. Polish family out of Toledo, 2 generations. He has known my name since I was 26 and writing quotes off the parts counter at Bosch Rexroth. We drank 1 beer apiece in a corner booth and we talked about our wives. He never quite made the offer he had come to make, and I never quite let him. He asked again in 2021 and 2022 and 2023. Same booth, same Pilsner Urquell. His personal mobile number has been in my phone since the first one. In January 2021, Theo installed Teddy as VP of Strategic Accounts. 26 years old, Stanford MBA, a leased Audi crossover in the corner of the lot. He inherited my customer book on the org chart. I kept driving it. The first administrative sales assistant they hired to support him quit no notice in September 2021. The second quit in May 2022. In March 2022, Teddy flew to East Chicago to walk the Cliffs Mill with me. He wore all birds in the yard. He asked the plant maintenance manager what DCS stood for. Maria Bennett poured me a coffee in her office at the end of the day, looked at me without quite smiling, and asked what the platform meant. I said it meant Teddy. Jordan was the third assistant. Jordan quit in September 2023. The same week Jordan emailed her resignation, Marcus replied to a sales team distribution list thread about reposting the role, and the reply all caught 7 addresses, including mine, because the distribution list had been built to include me. The body of the email was 3 lines long. The third line said, "Good riddance. Get HR to find another." Brenda Kaminsky Doyle, Lakeshore's controller since 1996, 60 years old, same age as me, same parish as my Babsia's parish, was on the distribution list too. I read the email at my desk at 4:19 on a Thursday afternoon. I did not forward it. I did not reply. I closed the message. I closed my laptop. I drove home. In November 2023, Marcus told me at my quarterly review that the company was looking at structure. He used the word 3 times. I knew what structure meant. I did not say anything. I drove home. So that was who was sitting at the table that Tuesday afternoon when Marcus slid the memo across. A man with Bart Sawicki's mobile number in his phone since 2020. A man with an email in his wife's Yahoo archive that nobody at Lakeshore remembered existed. A man whose 2 biggest customers had known his voice on the phone longer than they had known the current president's name. Marcus thought he was firing a ride-out cost. He thought I was a budget line he could shave to make room for a Stanford MBA who could not name a directional control valve in the field. He was wrong on every count, and the math of how wrong he was had been sitting in Teresa's Yahoo archive for almost 8 years, waiting on a printer. He was not firing me. He was starting a clock, and the clock had been ticking for 4 years before he ever pressed send on the memo. I sat in the Subaru with my hands on the wheel and the heater warming, and I did not pull out of the lot. I did not call Teresa yet. I did not call Bart. I drove south. I drove to Slavic village. I parked at St. Adalbert's under a sky the color of the inside of a galvanized bucket. I went in through the side door my Babsia had used. The side chapel was empty. The candles on the iron rack under Our Lady of Częstochowa were burning down the way they had been burning down for the people of that parish since 1910. At 3:11 in the afternoon, I sat down in the second pew on the right, and I did not pray. I let the cold of the wood come up through me. I counted my breath. I waited to see what would arrive. What arrived was a number. It was the number of customers who had ever once asked to speak to anyone at Lakeshore other than me. The number was 0. What arrived after that was a face. It was Babsia's face from the last August before she died. We were sitting at the kitchen table on Madison Avenue. She was peeling apples for Placek with a paring knife, older than my mother. She was telling me, in Polish first and then in English, that a man who does not know his own worth will be sold cheaply by everyone else. I was 22 years old. I had not understood her. I had nodded the way you nod at an old woman who is not going to be alive much longer, and I had eaten her apples. At 3:34, I stood up. I genuflected the way she had taught me. I walked out into the parking lot. I called Teresa from the Subaru at 4:08. I did not have to explain. She had heard the word structure at our kitchen table on the Sunday before, and she had heard the way Marcus had said it through me, and she had been waiting at home for this call since the meeting got on the calendar. I told her 3 sentences. The cut, the meeting, the walkout. She let a beat go by. She said, "Bart has been waiting 4 years, Walt. Call him." I called Bart Sawicki at 4:22. He picked up on the second ring. He did not ask me what was wrong. He said, "Walt, Sokolowski's, 5:30. I said yes. We sat in the corner booth we had sat in 4 times since 2020. Same booth, same Pilsner Urquell. The kielbasa came out. The pierogi came out. He did not pull out a whiteboard. He did not pull out an offer letter. He told me what Penn Ohio's revenue had grown to since the last time we had talked, and what his sister Marta had been saying to him for 2 years about needing a real strategic accounts shop in Ohio, and what he had wanted to say to me in 2020 but had not let himself say. He said it now. He said the title was SVP Strategic Accounts. He said the base was $185,000. He said the commission was 2.2% flat on the accounts I brought and on the accounts I built from there. He said there was no development override layer. He said there was no non-compete because Bart did not believe in non-competes between men who already trusted each other. He said the start date was Monday, March 25th. He said, "You're 62, Walt. I'm not going to insult you." He paid the check. We shook hands over the table the way Theo Sr. and I had shaken hands over the parts counter on a Tuesday in November 1993. The handshake worked. I drove home at 7:15. Teresa was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a yellow legal pad next to it. She had already pulled the June 14, 2016 email out of her Yahoo archive. She had already opened a fresh document. She handed me a glass of water and said, "Draft your letter. Draft it now. Draft it like you mean it." I drafted the resignation letter at 6:30 Wednesday morning, 2 paragraphs. Effective immediate. Notice given despite the cut, because that was how a man in 1993 would have done it. I printed it on plain paper. I printed the June 14, 2016 email beside it. Single page, 8.5 by 11. I put both into a manila folder, the same one I had carried unopened the day before. I called Maria Bennett at the Cliffs Mill at 9 in the morning. I told her 3 sentences. She let a beat go by. She said, "Thank God." I was about to start asking around. She said, "I'll have my buyer call your new office in 2 weeks." I called Kenneth Howard at Sherwin-Williams Resin at 9:18. He said, "My purchase orders are going to follow you, Walt." He said, "That's how it has worked for 19 years. And that's how it's going to keep working. Tell me where to send them." At 9:55, Brenda Kaminsky Doyle stopped at my desk on her way to the copier room. She did not break stride. She left a manila envelope on my desk, and she kept walking. The envelope was thicker than the one in my hand. I opened it after she had turned the corner. 43 pay stubs, second quarter 2018 through fourth quarter 2023, every quarterly stub on which the override line item should have appeared and did not. A single sheet of yellow legal paper, my daughter Caroline's handwriting in the right margin. The override math worked out to $279,400 in withheld commission across 5 years and 10 months. A sticky note at the front, "Anna Kaminsky's office, 1 p.m. She's expecting you." Brenda had been on the same distribution list as the reply all email. She had been counting from her side of the book since September. At 10 in the morning, I walked into Marcus's office. I handed him the resignation letter. I did not sit down. He read it. He set it down. He looked up at me. He said, "Walt, we don't honor a 4-week notice from senior people. You're done today." "All right," I said. He had Megan Foster from HR walk me out. Megan was 28 and 6 months on the job, and she did the offboarding the way someone does it the first time. Too earnestly, too apologetically, with no folder held to her chest. She asked me for my laptop and my badge. She walked me to my desk and stood at a respectful distance while I packed nothing. There was nothing on the desk that was mine. The Rolodex on the corner had been a wedding anniversary present from Teresa in 1993. I left it. The kids' photos had been on my phone for years. At 10:14, we were at her desk doing paperwork. At 10:38, I walked out of the Lakeshore lot for the last time. I did not look back at the building. I drove to Karolinka on Detroit Avenue. Stash Wozniak and Joe Bevilacqua were already in our usual booth. Pani Helena, who is 70 and has been bringing me my Kapushniak without me ordering it for 15 years, brought me my Kapushniak without me ordering it. Stash looked at me. Stash said, "So you finally did it." Joe said, "I told you in 2022. They asked me where I was going. I told them." They both knew Bart's name. They had known it longer than I had. At 1:42, I was in Anna Kaminski's office on Euclid Avenue. Anna is 54, Polish out of Parma. She and my daughter Caroline have known each other for 6 years through the Cleveland Polish-American Bar Association. She had read Caroline's email the night before, and the override math by the time I sat down. She had the Ohio Bureau of Wage and Hour intake form printed and waiting. We went through the email, the 43 pay stubs, the calc, the Marcus reply all from September, my decline of the 2019 non-compete, the firing on the spot 2 hours earlier. She did not raise her voice. She wrote on a yellow legal pad. She said, "The principal is $279,400. We are going to add the 6% statutory interest. We are going to add liquidated damages for the willful non-payment. We are going to file under Section 4113.15 of the Ohio Revised Code." She said, "The firing on the spot adds a retaliation flag. I am putting that in the cover letter." She filed at 9:42 on Thursday morning, February 29th, leap year. The next 2 weeks moved fast on paper and slow on the road. I stayed off Lakeshore email. I let my desk extension forward to Brenda's voicemail because the inside counsel review was going to want a record of who called. On Monday, March 11th, Maria Bennett's procurement team flew into Akron and signed the letter of intent on the Cleveland Cliffs 5-year master with Penn, Ohio. 18-month transition. Marta Sawicki signed for Penn, Ohio. I signed as the new SVP Strategic Accounts. The ink on the page was the ink on the page. On Wednesday, March 20th, Sherwin-Williams Resin awarded Penn, Ohio its next purchase order cycle for the Bedford Heights plant. Kenneth Howard's signature went on the order. The first PO was $814,000. There would be 6 like it that quarter. On Monday, March 25th, I walked into Penn, Ohio's Akron headquarters at 7:45 in the morning. The window office Bart had picked for me looked east toward Goodyear's old headquarters. There was a coffee on the desk in a Penn, Ohio mug, and a printed list of the 73 plant accounts I would be inheriting, and a yellow legal pad. At 8, Bart introduced me at the Monday all hands. He said, "Walt's with us now. The next 30 years are different." 65 people clapped. I shook a lot of hands. I did not say much. I went to my office, and I started writing quotes. On Friday, March 1st, the wage claim notice on Anna Kaminski's letterhead arrived at Lakeshore by certified mail. Marcus's inside counsel reviewed it over the weekend. The cover letter named the email. It named the dates. It named the retaliation flag. At 7:11 on Monday morning, March 4th, my Lakeshore desk extension rang. The voicemail forwarded to my cell at 7:13. Brenda had set it up the day she handed me the manila envelope. I listened to it in my window office in Akron at 7:22. Marcus's voice was thin. There was a rustle behind it, like papers being moved fast. He said, "Walt, wait, Walt, tell me there isn't a copy of that email." I did not call him back. I deleted the voicemail. Then I undeleted it because Anna had told me on Wednesday afternoon to keep keep every voicemail, every email, every certified mail receipt, every printout, the way I had kept the original email for almost 8 years. I forwarded the audio to Anna's intake address with no message body. I closed my laptop. I poured the coffee out of the Penn Ohio mug into a saucer because it had gone cold while I listened, and Marta came in at 7:30 with a fresh pot. She said, "Was that Akron coffee or Cleveland coffee?" I said, "Cleveland." She smiled. She said, "You'll get used to it." I picked up the yellow legal pad. I started writing the next quote. I wrote 3 quotes that morning. Then I drove to Mansfield to walk a stamping plant. By the time I got back to Akron at 6 in the evening, 2 of Lakeshore's other top 10 accounts had already left voicemails on the Penn Ohio main line. Their procurement managers had heard, by way of the Cleveland Industrial Fluid Power gossip line, that Walt Chmielewski had crossed Interstate 77 into Akron. They wanted to know if I could get to their plants in the next 2 weeks. I could. Across April and May, 4 of Lakeshore's other top 10 plant accounts contacted Penn Ohio. 3 of them migrated their purchase orders within the quarter. The 4th renegotiated his pricing schedule with Lakeshore for a 14% increase, which Marcus signed because by then he had no choice, and which Brenda Kaminsky Doyle entered into the books with the kind of small, precise satisfaction that has its own quiet color. By the end of June, Lakeshore's second quarter revenue was down 41% year over year. The numbers landed in Marcus's inbox on a Friday afternoon. He called a closed-door meeting with Teddy that same Friday at 4. Whatever he said in that meeting, the result that came out of it was a termination letter on Lakeshore letterhead, signed by Marcus, citing performance and accountability, dated June 14, 2024. Brenda Kaminsky Doyle ran the payroll cutoff for it on Monday morning before lunch. Marcus did not call Theo Sr. before he fired Theo Sr.'s son. He did not consult outside counsel. He did not loop the family trustee board. He cleaned out Teddy's office over the weekend himself. By Monday morning, the engraved nameplate that had read Theodore Lakeshore Jr., VP Strategic Accounts, had been pried off the door and dropped in a recycling bin behind the loading dock. Theo Sr. found out from his own daughter-in-law on a Tuesday, 68 hours after the termination letter went out. He drove to Cleveland from his place in Bratenahl. He did not raise his voice on the phone with Marcus on Tuesday afternoon. Neither did Marcus. Both men, I imagine, were quiet in the way that men go quiet when something is finished. On Wednesday, June 26, 2024, the Lakeshore Family Trustee Board met. 3 people, all of them Lakeshore family. The vote took 11 minutes. Marcus walked out of his own office at 4:40 in the afternoon with a banker's box and the same Brunello Cucinelli cuff he had been wearing the day he printed the Salesforce Re-Architecture 2024 memo. His silver-rimmed glasses had a smudge on the left lens that nobody told him about. He drove the Tesla off the lot for the last time. He did not look back at the building either. Lakeshore's third quarter came in down 53%. By then, 4 of Lakeshore's own salespeople had reached out to Penn Ohio, asking about openings. We hired 2 of them. There was no fourth quarter under the Lakeshore nameplate. The company that had hired me on a handshake in 1993 was sold on Thursday, October 31, 2024, to Industrial Fluid Power Holdings out of Cincinnati, $3.2 million in cash, assumption of $4.1 million in working capital debt, against a full 2022 third-party valuation of $14.4 million. The brand was kept for legacy continuity. The Cleveland office was consolidated into the Cincinnati buyer's Northern Ohio branch. 22 of the 38 Lakeshore employees were let go in the consolidation. Brenda was not one of them. The Cincinnati buyer kept the Cleveland office's controller because the Cleveland office's books were the only ones at that company that had been kept honestly for the last 7 years. Theo Sr. signed the closing documents in the same conference room where Marcus had read me the structure memo 8 months earlier, sitting at the same end of the table where he had not looked up. Then he flew to Naples for the winter and never came back to the office. Teddy Lakeshore Jr. was unemployed for 8 months. In the spring of 2025, he was hired as a senior manager at a Chicago consulting boutique that worked the industrial distribution sector. He posted a long, thoughtful piece on LinkedIn about lessons learned and the value of getting your hands dirty in the field. He stopped wearing AirPods Max around his neck. I do not know what he drives now. I did not watch any of this in real time. I was at plant yards. I was writing quotes. I was on Interstate 77 more weeks than I was at home, the same way I had been on Interstate 90, and Teresa raised herself the way she had raised the kids, quietly, without complaining, with a thermos of coffee waiting for me on the counter on the mornings I drove out at 5. The Ohio Bureau of Wage and Hour took 8 months and 9 days from Anna Kaminsky's filing to its finding. Anna and I went down to the Bureau's Columbus office twice in that window, once in May for a documentary review, once in September for a hearing. Anna brought the original printed email, the 43 pay stubs, Caroline's calc, and the audio of Marcus's March 4th voicemail, saved to a thumb drive in a labeled envelope. The hearing officer was a woman in her 60s who had been at the Bureau for 27 years. She listened to the voicemail twice. She did not say anything when the audio finished the second time. She wrote on her pad. The finding came on Friday, November 8, 2024. It found in my favor on the principle of the unpaid override, on the 6% statutory interest, on the liquidated damages for the willful non-payment, and on the cover letter retaliation flag tied to the Wednesday, February 28th firing on the spot. The Cincinnati Buyers General Counsel returned Anna's call within 48 hours. The math on the table for them was that fighting the finding through the Ohio courts would cost more than settling, and the principal had not been their company's debt, and they did not have political stake in defending Marcus's behavior. Marcus by then was in his 6th month of a sabbatical that was not called a sabbatical, and he was not going to be deposed on the Cincinnati Buyers nickel. They settled within 10 business days for $310,000 plus attorney fees. The check arrived at Anna's office by certified mail on Thursday, November 21st. She called me on Friday, November 22nd at 10 in the morning. I drove down to Cleveland from Akron. I deposited the check at my community bank on Detroit Avenue at 2:17 in the afternoon. The teller was a woman in her 50s named Linda, who had been at that branch since I had opened the account in 1996. She did not ask. I did not say. She took the check, ran the deposit, slid the receipt across with a small, steady nod, and said, "You take care of yourself, Mr. Chmielewski." I drove home. Teresa had a stew on. James had emailed pictures of his kids. Caroline had emailed me a single line. "I am proud of you, Dad." I read it twice. On Sunday, November 24th, I woke up at 5:30 the way I have woken up on Sunday mornings since 1969. Teresa drove. The Subaru's heater was on. We came up to St. Adalbert's at 7:40 in the morning, 20 minutes before 8 Mass. The parking lot was half frozen. There was no precipitation. I could see my breath in the air. Teresa parked in the same spot Babsia and I had walked to from Madison Avenue when I was 8 years old. I told Teresa I would be 10 minutes. She said, "Take 20. She turned the heater up. She poured a thermos cap of coffee for herself. I shut the door. I went in through the side door. The chapel was empty the way it had been in February. The candles on the iron rack under Our Lady of Chenstochowa were burning down for the people of that parish, the way they had been burning down since 1910. I put $2 into the slot. I lit a candle. I did not pray. I stood there for a minute. I thought about Babsia at her kitchen table on Madison Avenue with the paring knife in her hand and the apples in her lap, and I thought about Theo Sr. at the conference table with his eyes on the wood grain, and I thought about Marcus in his window office signing a termination letter for the founder's son without making the phone call he should have made first. I thought about Maria Bennett's voice on a Wednesday morning saying, "Thank God." I thought about Bart Sawicki across a corner booth at Sokolowski's saying he was not going to insult me. I thought about Teresa on her laptop in 2016 telling me to put the email where the company's network couldn't lose it. My grandmother used to say a man who does not know his own worth will be sold cheaply by everyone else. What she did not say out loud, but what I think she meant, is that the proof of his worth is who walks out the door with him. The Cliff's purchase orders walked out with me. The Sherwin orders walked out with me. Brenda's 43 pay stubs walked out with me. Bart's handshake had been waiting for me for 4 years on the other side of the door. Teresa was waiting for me in the Subaru in the lot. I stood there a few seconds more. The candle was steady. I genuflected the way Babsia had taught me. I walked out into the cold, dry morning, and I did not look back at the icon. I did not need to. The icon was not going anywhere. Teresa was reading something on her phone when I opened the passenger door. She put the phone in her lap. She handed me her thermos cap, the one with the rim that fit my mouth the way no other rim ever had, and the coffee was still hot, and she said, "Mass starts in 8 minutes." I drank the coffee. I closed my eyes for a second. I opened them. I said, "All right." She started the Subaru. We drove around to the front lot. I went into Mass with my wife of 38 years, and I sat in the second pew on the right of the side chapel, and I did the thing I had not done in February, which was pray. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what part landed hardest. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.